Hi everyone. So we're coming up to 10 days of this war in Ukraine, and Russia hasn't fulfilled its objective to topple the country. They still haven't taken Kiev. I honestly think Russia underestimated the sheer scale of resistance against them. I mean, it's impossible not to respect the courage of the Ukrainian people. Uh, as a nation, but also individual acts of heroism, people just defying the Russian aggressor. Um, it's also very sad but poignant to see young Russian soldiers making tearful calls to their mothers. I mean, some of these guys look very young, and it seems that they're disillusioned. One of the great points of interest in this conflict is that this great Russian military, one of the world's largest and most powerful, is looking like a bunch of bandits. There's serious disillusion. Soldiers are saying that they feel like they're being treated like cannon fodder by Putin. Um, some are definitely abusing their position, i.e., looting and doing things that are disgraceful. Um, but I think basically what's coming across is the Russians just seem very disorganized. They just seem really um, it's somewhere between disillusioned and out of control. I mean, this event at the nuclear facility in Zaporizhia is terrifying. Um, Apparently, some Ukrainian servicemen died defending the site. The fire's now been put out, thank goodness. But if that went up, if that went up, they estimate it would be up to 10 to 13 times more powerful than the Chernobyl fallout. And what happened with Chernobyl? Thousands were made sick, hundreds died. Toxic clouds spread over Europe. It was catastrophic. So it's terrifying to think that Putin's forces are so reckless that they would actually fire on a nuclear facility and absurdly claim that they're protecting it. I mean, it's madness. Apparently, Russian troops have been refusing orders now to shell cities, but I think there's breakdown. I think some units are forcefully executing Putin's plans, and others aren't. What I hope happens within the Russian military is there are mutinies and there's mass disobedience. And soldiers turn against their commanders. Even better, middle-ranking officers turn against their commanders. Apparently, there was a major general killed the other day, which is rare in any war, but that's going to be a big blow to the Kremlin. I don't think Putin cares about ordinary soldiers, but that's going to be humiliating. Um, Casualties, as always in war, it's difficult to ascertain the exact figures, but I think it's very clear this is turning into a very bloody war. What was interesting is I want to talk about this UN vote. So 141 countries voted against Russia's actions and called for an immediate ceasefire and condemned Russia's aggression. 141. 35 abstained, 5 voted against. Now, the 5 that voted against are not that significant because they're kind of the usual suspects. Syria, Venezuela, North Korea, they're countries that are basically have zero moral credibility anyway, because they too are run by brutal dictators. The 35 abstentions are a point of interest. Now, I thought that a vote like this, I didn't follow it as it happened, but I thought this sort of vote, a majority would condemn Putin, but I didn't think it would be that overwhelming. 141 countries. Um, I thought it would be a bit more balanced simply because Russia has, a lot of influence in the world. So I think that sends out a powerful statement. Even countries that are not exactly pro-West have condemned Russia. That's interesting. Now, the abstentions, China was one of them. That's not surprising, so I don't think we need to read too much into that. Um, but one was India. Now, that's attracting a lot of debate. I noticed that Indians have been very defensive about this on BBC India and so on. They're talking about the BBC is always trying to make India look bad. Well, the way I look at it is I get the history. India was non-aligned during the Cold War, and India's always had quite good relations with Russia. It was non-aligned during the Cold War. But India calls itself the world's biggest democracy. Now, if New Delhi cannot bring itself to condemn an act of aggression by a dictator against a sovereign nation, I think they've damaged their credibility. Um, it's not about India has to follow what the West does. It's about India doing the right thing. And I think India's made a big mistake with this abstention. An abstention is not a neutral position in a case like this. It basically means appeasing the aggressor. Um, that's how I see it. So I'm disappointed by India, but I can't say I'm massively surprised. India is a country that's quite hard to place geopolitically in the sense that it's it's certainly not pro-West and it's not exactly I wouldn't say it's pro-Russia and it's certainly not pro-China, but it's a country that is trying to make its way in the world. It's a powerful country, fifth largest economy. It's surpassed the UK in recent years. It's a nuclear power. It's a major military. Yeah, India has serious domestic problems. It still has extreme poverty. Um, there is significant religious upheaval. And I would say that under Modi, the rise of nationalism has, rather than strengthened India, I would say has weakened India. Um, of course, it's up to the Indians to vote whatever way they want, but I think they've made a mistake. And I would say to those Indians who are defending it and saying, oh, why should we follow the West? It's not about following the West, it's about doing the right thing. Um, and I just think that's very unfortunate. But coupled with this, there has also been protests around the world, anti-war protests, which are the largest probably seen since the Iraq War in 2003, 19 years ago. Now, some places are not surprising: London, Sydney, Toronto, New York City, Tokyo, Vancouver. But what's interesting is there's also been protests in places that wouldn't necessarily always align with NATO. So, for example, Athens, Bogota, um, Lima, Seoul, Mexico City. Berlin has seen some of the biggest demonstrations. But it does interest me that some of the South American countries, Lima, Mexico City, Latin America, Bogota, those countries, again, like India, they've sort of been non-aligned traditionally. So um, that's good to see. It's good to see that there is a widespread consensus against Putin's actions. There were protests in Seoul. Now, whether this is from a Ukrainian diaspora or whether it's just from ordinary Korean and Peruvian citizens, either way, it's good to see. Um, so clearly, there is an international backlash against Russia. Um, I saw a video which was, I think it was Euronews or Video Free Europe, excuse me, interviewing Russian people. Now, some of them were towing Putin's line and saying they think the president's telling the truth. It's necessary. Don't believe Western media. But I have noticed that there are Russians openly speaking out. I'm not going to say it's a majority. At the moment, at least, it's not. It is possible that Russia, Putin's made his country a pariah in the eyes of the world. This is going to seriously weaken Russia. It's a great power, but it's definitely no superpower, at least in terms of its current positioning in the world. It's not a country that you can ever underestimate. It is a nuclear power. It's got more nuclear weapons than anyone, but it's a pretty lackluster economy. It only ranks 12th in the world by GDP, and then per capita, it's even lower. A major military, but as we've seen in Ukraine, this huge military cannot take on a smaller country. They still haven't taken Kiev. Um, so, all this grandstanding from Putin, I think Russia's actually in some ways looked quite weak. And now the Russian people are going to suffer. Not as much as the Ukrainian people, but they're going to suffer. They're going to see massive changes in their economy. What could happen is Russia could get back to where it was in the Yeltsin era, severe economic stagnation. And I honestly think this could really turn against Putin once and for all. Recent years, anti-Putin demonstrations have been getting bigger and bigger, but there is still quite a solid majority of Russians behind Putin. I think this time it could finally turn around and there'll be some sort of coup d'etat in Moscow. I really hope so. I'm just going to quote a woman in St. Petersburg who said, if I can find the quotes, um, I've lost it now, but she said, "We're all suffering because of Putin." That's from verbatim, but it was along those lines. So, people need to be aware in all of this crisis. This is not the Russian people. True, some of them will regurgitate Putin's lines, but they are only getting media that is pro-Kremlin. They are being heavily restricted in what they see. Russia's a proud country, and some of them will have that knee-jerk defense of Putin. But I think the fact that there are Russians speaking out is encouraging, and huge respect to them. So I would say, it's important that we don't go into Russophobia. I prefer to say, the UN vote against Putin rather than the UN vote against Russia. Um, Although, of course, technically that's what it was. Um, but what's incredible is these scenes of Ukrainians. There was one footage of a young soldier, a young Russian soldier, and Ukrainian civilians were giving him a drink, letting him call his mother. They were treating him very well. So there's two things that are astonishing. Firstly, the courage of the Ukrainian people, ordinary men and women defending their homeland. Secondly, is the the magnanimous nature that they've shown prisoners of war. There's many conflicts around the world where the Geneva Convention go out the window and POWs would be just shot on the spot. Now, I say that cautiously because the more Ukrainian civilians suffer and the more atrocities Russian forces commit, I think that sort of sentiment might disappear and Ukrainians may get angry against ordinary Russian troops because they might think, well, you're continuing to follow orders, you're continuing to do this. Um, and I think if that continues to happen, if civilians continue being killed, then the Russians can't expect to be treated well. I do sympathise with young soldiers who've been lied to, but I think if they know that, they now have responsibility to refuse orders. They have responsibility to maybe even consider mutiny. It's dangerous and it brings risk to them. But the alternative is having their conscience haunted forever that they murdered civilians, that they, were part of an unjust war. So I would urge those soldiers to be brave, look at their conscience, and I think it should be openly encouraged. I think Western countries should encourage those Russian soldiers to mutiny. Putin need to feel as much pressure as possible. Um, I think we should also publicly shame Putin for his disregard for Russian lives, for Russian lives. If he doesn't care about Ukrainians, but I think publicly shaming him for his disregard for Russian lives, young Russian men who are being used as cannon fodder, would be good propaganda. On this issue of propaganda, I saw a comment the other day saying, "Oh, don't think both sides don't use propaganda." But you know something? Not all propaganda is bad. And if we show emotive images of dead Ukrainian children, it's propaganda in the sense that it's using emotive images, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Propaganda isn't necessarily a falsehood. It's just an angle of one side over another. But in this case, it is a David and Goliath situation. So pro Ukrainian propaganda is justified propaganda. I mean, that's something we need to consider that just because, Western media outlets are covering this very, very pro Ukraine doesn't mean it's false. I mean, it would be pretty absurd if the BBC or CNN said, well, it's 50-50. This is the Ukrainian side, this is Russia's side. And actually, they have shown the Russian perspective. They've quoted Putin, they've interviewed Russians, so Russia can't say it hasn't had its say. As for RT, they might point to that. The fact that it now, Wurzel Gummidge, one of my subscribers, pointed out that RT has now been blocked, and I thought I'd check this out. Right enough, it's blocked on YouTube. Great. I honestly think that's a good thing because RT, they will say Ashin Ratansi, who's one of Britain's RT lapdogs, pretty loathsome character. His Facebook page was full of whining about how RT was being censored, but this network has been lying for years. It's not a normal news network, which is just Russian perspective. It is motivated by a ultra-nationalist, pro-Russian, anti-West agenda, and it always has been. Um, I mean, people just need to look into the background of RT, see what it's about. So I honestly have no sympathy with them. Um, you know, they can say, "Oh, we're victims of censorship," but they've had opportunities to clean up and to be a bit more truthful, and they've just failed to do so. They continue pushing the Kremlin's lies. They never ever question Putin. They're a disgrace to journalism, so I've no sympathy with them. I really don't. I know that there'll be backlashes. The BBC will probably be blocked in Russia. That's unfortunate, but it's the way it's going to be. As for Ofcom, well, they've opened up more investigations. They're twiddling their thumbs while Ukraine burns. I have very little respect for Ofcom. I think they've shown weakness. I think that their failure to take away RT's license is a joke. Um, and really, it's pathetic. I mean, what do they think these investigations are going to achieve? They'll issue some report and they'll say we expect RT to cooperate, but RT doesn't take Ofcom seriously. They never have. They've always poured scorn on Ofcom's findings. So what are they waiting for? Why are they twiddling their thumbs? Why are they just doing what they've always done instead of recognizing that RT isn't going to change? The only thing that will make any difference is taking away the license. So to be honest, I'm very frustrated with Ofcom's weakness. It's pathetic, quite honest. They have the power to do it, and for some bizarre reason. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a fear of the Kremlin. I don't know if it's this notion that, oh, well, we better not because there'll be reprisals against the BBC in Russia, or if they're just being computer says no sort of mentality. Oh, well, we have to do it by the book. Come on, Ofcom, get a backbone, take action, do your job. Um, I'm going to round this up. Yeah, I think that that UN vote really is telling, because people can't say, "Oh, well, it's just Western countries." It's not. Many of those countries, African countries, Asian countries, have condemned Russia, and credit where credit's due. China, I'm not even going to criticize because honestly, China has no moral credibility either. Of course, China is going to back another dictatorship. Um, Interesting though that even China didn't join those five who opposed any sanctions. They just abstained. So maybe Putin is actually losing support in Beijing. Maybe the Chinese behind the scenes are kind of frustrated with Putin because they might believe it is a reckless move, which it is. But publicly they're not going to say that because, they probably will want Putin's help when they decide to retake or invade Taiwan. Incidentally, this has obviously happened after the Winter Olympics. The Paralympics started today, but it looks like Russia kind of bided its time simply not to disrespect their Chinese friends because invading Ukraine during the Winter Olympics would have obviously taken away coverage of the Winter Olympics, would have grated on the Chinese. So that might sound really like a trivial thing, but I honestly think Moscow and Beijing think like that. Right, I'll wrap this up, but it's good to see that the world is, for the most part, has made the right choice. India, very disappointing, and I would just say this: if India gets attacked by China or suffers belligerence from China, which there's already indications that's happened, it shouldn't demand Western support. India wants to be big and strong and proud and do it their own way, fine, but don't, India needs to get that respect is a two-way street. From what I gather, there's this sort of nationalistic defensiveness coming from New Delhi, which is we demand respect from the West. Oh, but we're also a great country. We're going to do what we want when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So this idea that we shouldn't follow the West. except it's not about following the West. It's about doing the right thing. India has failed to do the right thing.